Hi, everybody. This is Jennifer Harvey Sallin with I Heart Earth, and I'm back with another climate engagement conversation. This time, we welcome back Kelly Isabelle DeMarco. Kelly was with us in January for a discussion about regenerative activism for women. It was a very nourishing conversation that we had. And something that we talked about was that Kelly is a former priest, and I grew up in the church. My dad was a minister. So we talked about the sort of connection that we had in terms of the ministry mentality. And even though neither one of us are involved in the church at this point, this ministry thing is in our soul, and we wake up and think about ministering to the world and to people, to non-human beings as well, to the entire planet. And so Kelly has done that as an occupational therapist, but also as a climate coach. And a lot of her work is centered around climate coaching. So I'm very happy to have you here, Kelly. Welcome back.
Thank you. Good to be here.
I want to just encourage anybody that's listening and watching that you may want to go back and watch Kelly's first conversation with me from January, because, we talked about a lot of really important themes, and you shared a lot about your story of how you got involved in climate change activism and, all of the ministry work you do for the earth, so to speak. And so, again, it was a very nourishing conversation for me, but I think for listeners as well. I've gotten a lot of feedback on it, that it was such an inspiring conversation, and your story is, super inspiring. So you're back today because it's lovely to talk to you, but also because you've had a lot of life change since January, and it set you on even, let's call it like a fast forward path of development and awareness about the interconnection of climate issues, of the need for community, of the ways that all of the hats we wear, as you've said to me, all of the hats we wear come to serve how we serve the greater good and our activism work. So I will let you give everybody an update on what has been going on since January.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for the opportunity to be here and to just share more of my story, our story. I started YouTubing because I was just like, I just need an outlet. Like, I just need to talk about this because it's like my head's spinning, and that was a very real way to ground myself. So in June, I don't know if I mentioned much in the last episode about my husband's journey, but he's dealt with chronic pain for a long time. It had seemed to kind of disappeared for a good while. I think he had engaged in a lot of really deep meditative practices that helped. Just the lifestyle that we were living as ministers was a very different lifestyle than we've been living as farmers. Yeah. And so once we started farming about 5 years ago, his symptoms, just different pain symptoms, started to emerge. And he was treating them as if they were related to the work that he was doing, because they seemed like it. It was like carpal tunnel stuff after he would do, work with a staple gun or be hammering in fence posts, or a lot of symptoms in his forearms when he was milking our goats. We ended up having to let go of the goats. And, just throughout his whole body, he was experiencing all these different symptoms, and he was doing a lot to treat them. Increasingly over time, he spent more and more of his time in the evenings recuperating. So at the end of the day, we would all come home, have a lovely dinner, and then he's like, okay, bye. I need to go take care of my body now. And it's interesting because I'm like body worker. I have been an occupational therapist. I in a lot of ways, I've really held a high regard for the need to care, the need for self-care. Yet watching him go through his own journey and dealing with pain I was like, really? Like, you're going to go to bed right now? Like, you're going to go take care of your body right now? Like, it's really that bad? Like, that's not normal that that you just go check it, like go put yourself away for the night and take care of you. And I just like had this mental, like, this is the right amount. This is too much, this is, and I'd kind of work myself out of that thinking because I see, if he did his work at night, he got a good night's sleep, he'd come up in the morning like really refreshed. And I was like, okay, yeah,
it's
you
worth
definitely
it.
need to do that. Like, you need to take care of yourself. And I've probably erred more on the side of like staying up too late, getting up too early, and like just, I don't know. But in January, he got COVID. And then in March, like end of March, he had the sinus infection, and just like he just kept like holding his head here and like holding, he's like, he got treatment with an antibiotic. Some of the symptoms started to go away, and then they reemerged. And in June, early June, he's like still like has chunks of blood coming from his nose. So he goes back, he's like, what do I do? He's like, I'm going to get an appointment with an ear, nose, and throat specialist. So he kind of avoided mainstream medical doctors because they never really helped with the pain in the past. They'd give him, it's just like, they don't know what to do with chronic pain.
Yeah.
They labeled it as fibromyalgia, but it wasn't fibromyalgia. They, labeled it as ankylosing spondylitis, but it wasn't that. And so finally he's like, okay, I'm just going to have to figure this out on my own. So he did, through all these alternative practices and a lot of meditation, and that really helped, but now in the spring, he's got all of this stuff going on. And I think for me, like working in healthcare and having been in lockdown, I saw as people emerged from that, it's like their bodies forgot how to fight infection. And so everyone was getting all these crazy infections of all different kinds. And it's like, well, yeah, those are all the ones that you would have gotten had we not been in lockdown, had we been just like living life exposed with each other, and our bodies forgot how to fight. So now you're going through this stuff. But by June, when it wasn't like the same infection as lingering, for 8 weeks, and the ear, nose, and throat specialist that, he like bypassed the regular doctor, went to the ear, nose, and throat specialist. She put him on another round of antibiotics. And after 5 days, like he called me one day at work and he's like, I don't know what to do. What should I do? Like, I'm still having all these symptoms, and do I, like, they want me, he's like, I emailed them because you can't just directly call, you have to message. And he's like, he told me just to continue the course. And I'm like, it's like my brain is like, and like probably a week prior to that, he came up to my room in the morning because he sleeps in the basement where it's cold and dry and quiet and dark. He came up in the morning and he was crying, and he hardly ever cries. He was crying and he's like, I feel like I'm dying. He's like, am I dying? And he's just like crying, and he's like, my body hurts everywhere. And the Sunday night before he had called me when I was at work, he asked me to come downstairs after dinner. And he'd kind of gone through this whole, like he had this whole regimen. If we'd ever watch a movie in the evening as a family, he would like have this whole setup just to get comfortable. And I was always like, oh my God, you're so weird. Like, why can't you just be normal? And he had this auditory sensitivity, and in January was diagnosed with misophonia. I was like, thank God we have some kind of diagnosis to explain all these symptoms. And like every time I would chew, he's like, would just get so annoyed by my chewing. So I was just like, I can't talk. I can't chew. I felt like everything I was doing was a trigger for his symptoms. So here we are in June, second round of antibiotics, 5 days in. And all of a sudden I'm hearing him on the phone. I'm in my role as a therapist and a rehab manager. I'm working in healthcare. I'm surrounded by nurses. And I just started talking. Like, people are like, how are you? I'm like, I don't know. My husband is in so much pain right now. I don't know what to do. Like, he's had this 8-week-long sinus infection. He's blowing chunks of blood out of his nose. Like, he's gone to urgent care. He's gone to the ENT. He's like, I don't know what to do. And I'm like, this doesn't seem normal. This isn't normal, right? And they're like, no, it isn't normal. And so finally I'm starting to get feedback. And I'm like, okay, right, it's not normal. I'm like, I think I'm going to go call the ENT myself. And it was within our system. I work within the healthcare system for Freighter. I called, and it's within our system. And I'm like, I'm calling as I wear the hat of rehab manager. I'm a therapist. I've worked in this industry for 30 years. I said, I'm calling because my husband is trying to navigate a broken healthcare system. He's on his second round of antibiotics. And I said, I'm watching this man slowly die. And he's not getting the help that he needs. And they're like, well, he needs to finish the course of antibiotics. And then we'll talk to him. Then we'll see him again. And I'm like, are you flipping kidding me? I said, who do I need to call? So I said, you're okay. I'm going to call urgent care. I'm going to call the ER or urgent care. So I got off the phone, I called urgent care. And the woman there said, like, well, I'm going to work with you to get him in for a full lab workup. And she's like, we can't do that here, but your primary can. Well, we had bypassed the primary because that wasn't helpful before. And then we're in lockdown. So the last safe place you want to go is the doctor's office, where you're going to get like exposed to all these germs. So God bless the nurse practitioner that saw my husband the next morning at 8:30 a.m. She met with him for a full hour. Julie Parve was amazing. Met with him for a full hour. Then she put him in for like a full lab workup. It was like labs and then more labs. And the first lab results, I'm watching them through that day. So then I bring him home from the doctor's office, from the labs. He gets out of the car, lunges onto all fours, and is vomiting profuse amounts of water. But I've been watching him like deteriorate. And when you see something happening like microscopically slow, you adjust. You adjust to the crisis, and it doesn't feel like a crisis because you've been seeing this for so long. That's like another layer of the same thing.
Yeah.
So I tuck him in the basement. I'm like, do you want me to stay here? Do you want me to go to work? Like, we're going to wait for the lab results. We can't really do anything till we get them. Are you okay? He'd already thrown up his orange juice in the morning before we went for the labs. Then he threw up all this water after. And he's like, go to work. You need to save your PTO. That's my motivation for going to work, because we have like a very finite amount of paid time off.
Paid time
so
off.
I'm like, I don't want to use my PTO if I don't have to. Are you in dire straits?
Yeah.
Or are you okay? He's like, I'm okay. You go to work so you don't have to use your time off. And then we'll find out, like, we'll figure it out later on. And I also had an event that evening for work that I needed to present at. So I was like, okay, I'm going to go to work. And the girls are here. My girls have gotten used to him spending a lot of time in the basement because he's taking care of himself. And so like we've all been adjusting for a long time. And it's an inconvenience. It's not fun, but we've all figured it out. And so I go to work and I'm watching the lab results come through. And I'm like, I shared them with my boss, and she's like, well, those look fairly normal. And, share them again. I'm like, they're just like slightly off. And then I get a phone call from the nurse practitioner, and I hadn't seen the next results come through. She's like, go home, get your husband, take him to the ER right away. And we live like 40 minutes from, we were on a farm north of town. And I was like, okay, I knew it. Like, I knew something was going on. I knew we had to act quickly. I knew that he was going to die if I didn't like make some phone calls right away. I knew that, like I knew it in my being, but I'm in the system that's like slogging through mud.
Yeah. Like put a Band-Aid
And
on it. It's going to be fine. Put a Band-Aid on it. It'll be fine. Just
yeah.
put another Band-Aid.
And he's like, I'm not okay, but nobody's like hearing me. And even me, like I was not hearing him anymore because I'm like, I've been watching this for so long that I don't know what to do about this. So I get him into the ER, and the ER doc was amazing. He's just like, we've got you. Like, we're going to work you up, man. We're going to do all the stuff. We're going to be poking you. We're going to be testing you. Like, he was like a lab specimen. I mean, they were coming in, taking loads of blood, loads of fluids, loads of swabs. They were running him through CAT scans and PET scans. I mean, in and out of the door, like, and 3 potential diagnoses were coming up. One was sarcoidosis. Another was parathyroidism, hyperparathyroidism. And then the third was multiple myeloma. And I'm like, multiple myeloma. I'm like, that's bone cancer. I'm like, no, he doesn't have bone cancer. No. He's in his 40s. Like, no.
He's like on an organic
farm. He works on a farm. Like we take care of, he meditates, he does all the stuff, he eats all the good food. Like, and you know, the guy is like, he's like, well, you have these lytic lesions throughout your whole body. Like, that's why you like the pain. You have very good reason for being in pain. Like, your body is riddled with lytic lesions.
And like, they're only finding it after all these years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, within 2 days, we got the diagnosis of multiple myeloma, and he was rushed to the oncology center and at the main campus, and the oncologist was amazing. You know, it's like once we had a word for it, like the whole system just, you know, rallied around and rushed in to do everything. And you know, as a climate worker, like somebody who's advocating, I'm like, this is what we do with our planet too. Like, we wait until it's a flipping, like, level 10 emergency. Yeah. It's a wildfire, it's massive floods, it's like all this stuff. And then we rush in because that's when the alarms go off. But prior to that, we've gotten so used to these slowly rising waters or slowly rising temperatures, like the frog in the pot, you know, like it's like we just adjust and adjust and accommodate and adjust. And I was doing it too.
It reminds me of the shifting baseline syndrome, you know, where it's your normal. Like you said, you and your girls were like, okay, well, that's where he goes when he needs to self-care. Like, that's a daily thing. Okay, it's a little weird, but it's not weird enough to be rushing to the ER. It's just it's normal weird, not like you know, urgent crisis, all alarms go weird. Yeah. That is what has happened to so many of us. It's like, oh, okay, well, I'll have people say to me like, yeah, well, I know, I mean, I consume a bit too much, or yeah, I know I probably like eat too much meat, or yeah, I know I shouldn't fly so much. But it's like, yeah, it's a little bad, but it's not really bad. And I'm thinking, yes, but all of it's bad. Like, it's just a shifting baseline syndrome problem that it only looks sort of bad. It's something. And of course, I see it all the time in psychology. I mean, you know, people with their own mental health, like, oh, well, you know, I'm only feeling depressed some of the time, so it's not that big of a deal. Yes, it is a big deal. Like, feeling depressed is a big deal. It needs attention, you know, but it's like that across the board, I think.
Yeah. And he had like been dealing with depression, with isolation, with all these things that, you know, now when I read like the symptoms that go along with multiple myeloma, like, how do you know you have it? Well, you might have it if you have all these things, but when you're so in it, and it's come on like one by one, you know, you reason it this other way. And Yeah.
Yeah.
So now our entire world is like flipped inside out and upside down. And, you know, I feel like just now, this summer feels like a blur.
Yeah, because it's just 2 months ago that you got the diagnosis.
Yeah, June 9th.
Yeah.
June 9th was, I think, the date that he went into the hospital. And I think June 11th was the date he got the diagnosis.
Yeah.
And I've had more people come to our farm in the past 2 months than we've ever had here.
I bet.
I finally got my whole family here, almost all of them at once, all of them within the span of like a week, which was awesome. A lot of Tim's family have come, like a bunch of guys from his class are coming in a week to help with a project that I've got. I had people coming out of the woodwork from my daughter's schools, and we just transitioned them to a different school last year. Partly because the bus comes right by our house and we don't have to drive them anywhere, and partly because it's just a better fit for them. And holy cow, I had moms like, I had to send a message to these moms, and I didn't even know who they were. I didn't know their names. I hadn't seen some of them before. I was just like, my daughter got your number. She got your numbers at the end of the school year because she likes your daughters and wants to hang out with them over the summer. I have this situation. My husband's in the hospital. I don't have any family here yet. I'm trying to figure out what to do. Is there any chance you could take him for the day? Like, take my daughter for the day? And they were just like, whatever you need.
Yeah.
I had one mom, Julie, she just was like, I'm there at 7:30 I'll take her to breakfast. She can come hang out with us for the day. I had a message her later and like, any chance she could spend the night too? And this is like total going on faith. Like, you don't give your kids to strangers and let them just hang. I'm like, you sound lovely. Like, your response to me was lovely. Our brief phone conversation was awesome. Like, thank you. And I'm just gonna trust that she's gonna be fine. And she ended up staying for a couple nights in a row, had a great time. That's why we were going through all the battery of tests just to get to the diagnosis.
All right.
So,
yeah, something that, has come from your story. Of course, I watched some of your YouTube videos, and you and I have stayed in touch since the last time. And it's something that's really stood out for me that, this crisis is always an opportunity. And a lot of times it feels like we're just sort of like, let's fix that crisis and then get back to normal. And it's like, no, you learn a lot from a crisis. And ideally there's like a whole technical lingo about this that actually for my next talk, I'm going to be talking with Lotte van Lith, which is a specialist in the positive disintegration theory.
right.
Yeah, and for the next talk, but that theory is like relevant just to our discussion as well. That the idea is you want to take a crisis as the opportunity to integrate at a higher level. It means like, stop ignoring the things that you were ignoring before. Take the opportunity to respond at a higher level, so to speak. In the lingo of the theory, like, don't just reintegrate at the same level. Don't just solve the crisis and then everything's the same.
Yeah.
Because the temptation, like, and you've said this, the temptation could be just to, say, okay, what can I do to fix this? I got to fix this. It's all on me, and just dump it all on yourself and try to be the manager of everything and try to fix it all. But you're like, no, this is an opportunity for me to reestablish community and, or establish it further than I have. And like you said, have faith and trust that things are going to be okay, and feel that sense of safety and community that a lot of us don't feel so much anymore because of the way that the world is, and everybody being so individualistic and sort of, thinking, okay, well, it's just my doctor's job to care for it. And then it's like me and my doctor, and we got to figure it out. It's like, no, it's you and your whole community. And it is that opportunity to really engage with the crisis as an opportunity. And of course, you've used it like in so many ways, also with the climate, and just making the parallels between what we're doing to the earth and what we're doing to our bodies, and just the way we look at what is a human body, and where does it start and where does it end. I mean, even just the really deep awareness around that. I mean, you had it before because, like you said, you're a body worker, you're on the farm. I mean, you're an eco-activist, but but at the same time, I mean, integrating those things at an even deeper level, and then being able to speak out and bring your message even more powerfully out. You've done a lot in those ways.
And it's interesting because I think in the activism work, it's very easy to get really outerly focused, if that's a word, outerly, like to get focused out here and to lose our sense of self, to lose our connection with ourselves. And I actually, like in May, I was so at my kind of like the end of my rope with the pain, with Tim's pain, because I felt helpless to do anything about it. I didn't know how to fix it. I felt he was isolating because he had to manage, and I felt alone because I was like, I don't have a partner. I don't know what to do to help you to fix this. I don't know when the end is and what that looks like, and how do we get there, and how do we get to the other side of this. And I had enrolled myself, and I also felt like in my own work that I was trying to grow was like, I'm starting to feel like a robot. Like I'm starting to say things that I don't even know if I believe those things anymore. Like they're just like, I said them at once, and then it's like I kept repeating them, but it wasn't like my own language from my own heart in this like present moment anymore. And I realized like I need to reconnect with me, because really the only thing of value I have to offer is from me in the moment. It's like, it's live, it's moving. It's like, I can't offer some version of me that was even a month ago, because that's not alive anymore. And so I enrolled myself in a course called Sacred Self-Trust. And it was a coaching course with 3 other women, led by a woman who once upon a time had been my student when I was a priest. She came to my center, and it felt like coming full circle. I was just like, I'm coming back. Like coming back to myself through you. And like, I was thinking of like the teacher becomes the student, becomes the teacher, becomes the student. And her name is Jenny Glick. I will speak about her here because I just love her dearly. And going through her course was just so helpful and lovely. And like, I paid a good chunk of change for it, because I'm like, everything in my world right now hinges upon me loving me first, me caring for me first, me tending to the soil of my own body and my own heart and my own being first. And like through that process, like, I mean, there were some really like very strong prayers I had kind of going into that and in my first weeks. And like, boom, I mean, within that, like what happened, the diagnosis happened, and it was just like everything just accelerated at lightning speed. And because I was going through that process already through the course, I was like, I can either freak the hell out right now, or I can lean in like I've never leaned in before to personal growth and transformation. And I'm just gonna like lean into all these things I'm learning and make use of them right now, because I don't have a choice. If my family's gonna survive this, if my husband's going to get through this, if my daughters are going to get through this, if I'm going to have any sense of, like, if I'm going to like hold on to my climate work and the thing that I really care about most deeply, like I have to do this work right now. And I'm so grateful that I was going through that process, because I feel like now when I speak, like in these YouTubes, like I don't even give a shit anymore what I look like. Like, I don't give a shit how I sound. I'm just sharing whatever is in the moment to share, because that's the only thing I really have to offer. And I believe it's the best that I have to offer. And I feel like it's the same thing for all of us. Like the best we have to offer to each other is what is really, truly moving through us in the moment.
Yeah.
And I think we fill our lives with all this extra fluff and stuff because we don't know how to be that best version of ourselves in the moment. We don't know how to like give in to that, to let it come forth. And
yeah, it's a bad feedback loop, because the more that we don't feel safe, the more that we perpetuate that for other people, and then they perpetuate it back to us. And it's like everybody thinks that they have to be some other version of themselves in order to speak out, in order to have their voice, in order to be authentic. And then it's so ironic. You see like all these people speaking at each other, but not really, connecting from the heart.
Yeah. And it's like, I watched the movie with my daughter, is it 8 Mile, Eminem?
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, she's memorized a bunch of his songs. And so I was like, okay, let's watch this together. And I just love that moment where he's just like, have you seen the movie?
Mm-hmm. And I grew up
so he's just
right
like,
next to him. Isn't that funny?
Oh, you did?
Uh-huh. Yeah.
He's just like, you're right. Yeah, I'm this. I'm going to say all these things about myself because they're all darn, like they're all true.
Yeah.
And so what have you got on me? Because I already know all the shit. And that's my
that's
life.
how I feel.
Live it.
Uh-huh.
So I'm like, yeah, that's the beauty. That's where we all shine, is in our shit. Like, and not that we stay there, but that we're willing to like rise out of that. And that's the beauty of the lotus flower. It's like, it's the beauty that rises out of the earth. And, we just, I don't know. I think everybody's, I think right now, like this time that we're in on our planet, it's calling forth like the best of all of us. And I think the best of all of us we're a lot closer to it than any of us imagine. It's right there.
Yeah, but it does take seeing the crisis as the opportunity and being ready to engage, and I think let go of a lot of things like shame and anything that we're carrying with us that plays into these societal practices of like, having your robotic story and repeating it because that's what will impress, or because that's what people expect, or I don't know, looking a certain way because that's what will impress, or something like that. And just being like, no, when you let go of any of that, then what emerges is straight from the heart, and it is our best self. I mean, it doesn't mean that your raw self is always your very best self. I mean, sometimes we need to tame things. If I show up like as raw, angry, and violent, well, that's not necessarily going to be the best way to engage. But then again, I mean, there's stuff to let go there, because there's also probably healing that needs to be done when you're rageful and violent, and letting those healing those things, and like you're saying, turning your attention toward yourself and finding the way to nourish yourself so that you're able to show up for, like I said, from heart to heart. Yeah,
it's funny because as I was going through this, like being just exercising, like just showing up real and raw in the moment, I went to the hospital and stood in line to like wait for my access badge, and they only let 4 people go in to like during an admission, only 4 people can be on a list as visitors, and for infection control reasons. And one woman up in front of me apparently she'd gotten booted from the list by another family member. she was so mad. And let me tell you, every single person in the whole entire lobby and probably on the main floor of the hospital was aware of how mad she was. And she was like mad and screaming and crying and talking to someone in the phone while and I'm like, oh my gosh, I wish I could just help you learn how to give yourself a big hug, because we can all feel your pain.
Yeah.
And that's a whole lot of pain you're feeling. She just wanted to see somebody that she loved.
Yeah.
And just learning to love ourselves, to hold ourselves, to embrace ourselves, is just, that's probably one of the harder practices. It's a simple thing, but it's one of the harder things for us to learn to do as humans.
Yeah, very difficult. And especially if people already have trauma, because you can learn to sort of dissociate from yourself, feel fragmented or be sort of in a fragmented state, and then bringing that back together, especially during a time of crisis, is a challenge.
Mm-hmm.
But with the right support, it's doable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. So tell me more about this, some of the other connections that you've seen between cancer and climate that have come out of, all of these experiences that you've had in the last couple of months.
Yeah, I just keep looking at I think the way cancer kind of lurks in the dark, it kind of slowly takes hold in our bodies. And now we have all these new forms of new ways of detecting it earlier on. But that's not those aren't 100%, obviously.
Right.
And then it blows up. I mean, with multiple myeloma, they say it smolders for a long time, can smolder up to 30 years in some cases. And then all of a sudden, once it activates, it's just just explodes.
Yeah.
And I think that's I discovered, I first heard of the word, I heard about our climate changing. They didn't call it climate change, but it was our climate was changing in 1990. It was around the time of that first Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. When that was released, there was a big article in the International Herald Tribune, and I was ooh, that doesn't sound good.
Yeah.
And they're talking about unchecked global warming, and that eventually we would have water wars, and we would have all of these, all of our systems would be totally stressed and taxed, and it would lead to all these problems that we're now experiencing. And so I think, having read that article, immediately I dialed into holy shit, this is a big problem that's on the horizon, and it's going to happen in our lifetime. Mm-hmm. And I have committed myself to working in healthcare. That's a problem. This is a problem for human health. It's a problem for human well-being. In addition to everything else, it's a problem for. It's especially a problem for human beings. And so then, receiving that information, and I couldn't figure out a way to dive in the wearing my professional hat at the time. Mm-hmm. So I jumped in as I'm bike through Argentina and talk with people about the environment. Sure, I can do that. Go and collect trash. Yeah, I can definitely do that. And eventually it became work on a green team, and then more recently, I joined, Wisconsin Health Professionals for Climate Action. But when I lived in Colorado, I saw the pine, the pine beetle, the devastation that the pine beetle caused to the forest, and it would just devastate would eat everything in sight and kill the trees from the inside out. And I was organizing I've got the sun sitting just the right way. So when the pine beetles were taking over in Colorado, I was a bike tour director for a bike ride called the Colorado Peace Ride, and it was
Yeah,
a 4-day
I think
bike
maybe we
tour.
talked about it in the last call. Yeah.
Yeah, and I was just like, what is like? I'm not going to have a bike tour if all the trees die, because nobody's going to want to come and bike through these areas, because it's just going to be like prone to wildfires. And I just like kept anticipating what's coming next. What's coming next? Holy shit, what's coming next? And I felt like I was just walking around with this fear of what was coming next. And is this bike tour even going to survive the devastation of what's happening with the environment? And then, I moved to the Pacific Northwest, and the pine beetle had made its way out to Eastern Washington. And it felt like, oh my God, it's like, it's never ending. Like, these beetles are never going to stop doing what they're doing. And, and now everything's just going to burn up. And, everything has been burning up. And like, that's like, my husband, as he describes multiple myeloma inside of his body, he's like, it's burning. Like, I feel like I'm burning from the inside out. Like he's like, do you feel how hot my body is? And I'm like, no, I can't. I couldn't feel that on the outside, because it was decided.
Chasing the non-sun moment. There you go. That's better.
Okay. There.
That's good.
Is that all right?
Yeah, it's better.
Yeah, it was just like he's describing what his visceral bodily experience is. And I'm like, it's the same thing. It's the same thing that's happening to our planet. It's like all of the systems are being taxed and impacted. And eventually it's like, it's going to be, just like a full system shutdown, or we have these like huge interventions, which right now physically for him are the chemotherapy.
Yeah.
And that's the problem with what's happening on our planet is like, I keep saying, if we wait, it'll be too late, but it's true.
Yeah.
If we address it when it's an emerging problem, it's a heck of a lot easier than if we wait to address it when it's a crisis. And
I think one of the frustrating things about like techno-solutionism is that you have this idea that, I hear people say all the time, like, oh, well, there's going to be technologies in the future that that we are going to save us. And I'm like, yeah, but they don't exist. And you wouldn't say to a cancer patient, well, just live with it for a while, because probably in 6 months, a year's time, 2 years time, there's going to be some new pill that's going to save you. You're like, we got to deal with the cancer now, because the cancer is growing now. And you don't know, you can't predict how it's going to behave. It's not like, oh, it's going to be just chilling out and dormant until that techno-solutionism comes along. It's like, no, it's growing now. It needs attention now.
Yeah.
And the whole mentality of like, wait till it gets really bad and then, throw some extreme chemicals at it to kill it or something. That's not so smart either, because everything has its own consequences. Like, once you are in the crisis, like for Timmy, okay, you have to do chemo now. That's, okay, he could choose not to, but it would be like taking a huge risk. So yeah, you have to choose that, but that has its own consequences. People who get chemo have side effects of chemo that can last for the rest of their life. So it's like, we don't want to put ourselves in that situation.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So tell me also about, in the hospitals, just as you're going through and seeing how healthcare is done and how the system is like adapted or not to what's going on in our climate, in our world. You've had some interesting reflections on that.
Yeah, it really has been a light bulb moment for me, because I've been working, with Wisconsin health professionals for climate action and doing like, we're trying to like help inspire the launch of green teams across our state in all healthcare institutions. And
Yeah, and just for
I can,
listeners, you're in Wisconsin in the US.
yeah, in Wisconsin. So I'm like the grassroots green team leader at my workplace, and we've been trying to get, other people to just take that on within their institutions. And the challenge of that is always like, how do you get your senior leadership team to value that, like to want to do that, to see it as, because they're watching the bottom line and everybody's watching their budgets. And now on the as COVID lingers on, and now we have monkeypox and other things, it's like everybody's watching their bottom line all the time.
Yeah.
And yet, as a consumer going into my health, accessing care, I'm like, this sucks, because I'm here to access care for my husband, for his health. And I have to like make choices every day that are detrimental to our environment. Like all of the stuff that we're using as a course of his hospital stay, like it's going to be thrown away, most of it. It's going to be in a landfill somewhere. It's going to be a contaminant. And then I'm watching these things come up on trays, like the styrofoam cups, the straws, like I said before, like a styrofoam plate with an apple wrapped in plastic. I'm like, really? Like, is there not another way that we could do this? Like, does it really have to be that to be, safe? Plastic utensils wrapped in plastic wrap. The name badges. I mean, you can recycle the name badges, which I fortunately saw the bin where you could put because they've got this like little plastic piece and then it's a paper badge. But if you didn't know that, if nobody told you that, you wouldn't know that you could recycle it. They didn't advertise it. And I'm like, maybe a drop box on the way out, like by the parking garage, where you just throw them in there. And I'm like, those are all things that a green team could focus on.
Yeah.
A green team, and it doesn't take a whole lot of members. It just takes a few willing people to kind of look at what's the low hanging fruit and how do we address this low hanging fruit, and talk with, you talk with your suppliers, you talk with your, whoever's in charge of purchasing. Like, it's just having some conversations and being willing to like look at what the alternatives might be.
Yeah.
But as a consumer, I've seen it from the side of like me caring for the environment, me, or as a green team leader, like, there's the budgetary concerns. And so eventually, like, it actually helps your bottom line to be greening your organization and facility. But there's this other part, which is like the mental health, the mental well-being of your consumer. Like when they're consuming and accessing your care, accessing care through your healthcare institution, like to care for those things is also caring for that person that's, accessing care through you, and you're not forcing them to compromise their values.
Yeah. I mean, I think this is one of the big things that I see is around, from a psychological point of view, we are all carrying this really heavy moral burden of what we're doing to the earth. Some people will say that they don't feel anything, that they don't care, and whatever else. Okay, maybe there's a percentage of the population who feels no empathy about it and feels no sense of like moral burden. But I mean, the majority of us, I'm convinced the majority of us feel it, whether we're conscious of it or like some people dissociate from it because it's too painful, but it's there. Like, no, it doesn't. I think most people are pretty, kind people, and they don't want to like actively hurt anybody. And we know by our actions, we're hurting people, and we're hurting the earth, and we're hurting like people in the global south, and we're hurting, people everywhere, because it's not just the global south that's affected at this point. And we're hurting animals, and we're hurting the whole, like all the biosystems and everything. And that feels shitty just to walk around with that. And when when you're doing something like, I feel it on a micro scale, going to the Migros, the shop, where I get my groceries. It's, like stuff wrapped in plastic that just absolutely does not need to be wrapped in plastic. As you're saying, all this stuff, and I come home and I'm like, like I can recycle it, but still it's a whole big pile of recycling just for getting some vegetables.
Yeah.
Which is super frustrating. And it adds to this like moral burden where if they would do something like you're saying, the suppliers and they'd figure out their system that I could just get an apple without it coming in some plastic, then I would leave with more mental health thinking, okay, at least today I didn't, destroy something by just buying an apple. And I think there's so much opportunity for us as a community, like organizationally, individually, to each other. There's so much opportunity for us to lighten that load, to lighten that moral burden, because I do feel like it pushes people out into denial and escapism, because it's really hard to bear. There's a cognitive dissonance you have to live with as an activist who's aware of the moral burden. It is heavy. I know it is. And I think the only reason that somebody like me or somebody like you can deal with it is like, for me, I studied psychology. For you, you've been like studying coaching, you've studied these things, and like also in the ministry, like we have trained our minds to be able to sit with these really complex questions, like existential complex questions, like deep suffering. And I think, I can barely deal with it. It does affect my mental health, but I can only imagine somebody who has no experience dealing with these complex issues, doesn't have training on how you handle these deep emotions. What else can they do but sort of zone out from it?
Right.
So there's so much opportunity there. Like when we think about the opportunity through crisis, it's not just, ourselves. It is, as we're talking about, it is on our own, the level of like helping our own mental health and being there for our own selves, and finding that heart to heart from the inside. But it's also like organizations to the individual as well.
And I think that I think where I see a lot of people stop is like, this is so big, I don't know what to do about it, so there's nothing I can do. Like I'm not going to make a dent in this problem, so I'm going to go just take care of my busy life and the things that I've already got to take care of. And I think, I'm just like, there's so many ways to act, and really speaking up. I mean, it sounds so simple. It sounds like, but it's so huge, because the moment you speak up and the moment you start to say like, this matters to me, then you give everyone else that it matters to permission to say, oh yeah, it matters to me too. And now you've got a small group coming together, and it's like, what can we do about it?
Exactly.
And once you start to take action, I had a woman who participated in my green team, and I asked her, I'm like, hey, would you come join our green team? Because I was trying to put a team together. She's like, I said, why aren't you on the green team? She laughed at me and she's like, oh, I can do a lot of other things, but that is like, I can't do that. I'm like, why? She said, because it makes me, like, it terrifies me. And I'm like, that is exactly why you need to be on the green team, because you need to have an outlet to channel that terror, those feelings. And I think if everybody really gets real with themselves, the terror is down there. Like, it's just like, we're hovering above the surface and we're kind of numb out to it, because that's what we do with hard things. It's like, I gotta put food on the table. I gotta pick somebody up at 5 o'clock. Like, there's no room for terror in that. And so we just shelf it. But there is so much fuel in our terror. There's so much fuel. Terror is what makes an animal run for like miles and miles and miles to get away from the threat. But we just get lost in our busyness, and we have to know that like most of what we get lost in is actually counterproductive. It's destructive to the very thing that we need to save to like have that terror go away. Like, And no, I'm not going to fix it, and you're not going to fix it, and no one of us will fix it. But together, we can make a dent, and as that togetherness expands, that's where our hope lies.
Have you heard of the work of Karen O'Brien? She's a researcher in Lund in Sweden.
No, I haven't.
Oh, I think you would enjoy it. And I think a lot of listeners who are thinking about these exact themes would really enjoy it. She specializes in something called quantum social change. And it's this mix between quantum science and social change. And I mean, as the name suggests, and it's this idea that, you know, reality is quantum. It has really strange and spooky effects, and we can't say ahead of time exactly how things are going to go. We can only kind of know that every sort of jump of change, every sort of quantum change from myself rearranges basically all of reality around me. And so this idea that like life is linear and it just has to be like one step after the other and 1 + 1 + 1, you know, it's like that's not exactly how it is. There's like, you know, in the more sort of, let's say, spiritual world, we would call it a miracle. In the quantum realm, they would call it like a quantum leap or a quantum jump or something like that. And I think you and I, you know, from having a background in the ministry world, I'm sort of used to thinking like that. I'm used to thinking about how things that seem completely impossible today, by the end of the day, have just happened. And, you know, that can happen also with our world, but we tend to think so linearly. Like, well, if I speak up at the hospital, I'm only one person, so who cares? If I tell them that I'm really upset about all of the waste that they're putting, or that I would like a recycle bin or whatever, then they're not going to, I mean, who cares? I'm just one person. There's how many thousands of people passing through this place every day. They're not going to listen. But it's like just speaking out. You don't actually know what's going to happen after you speak out. That's the thing. You think I'm going to speak out and then that person's going to do something or reject me or say yes or whatever. Maybe it has nothing to do with that person in that hospital in the end. Maybe it has to do with the person that's next to you that hears you say that and says, oh my God, you too? I was just thinking about that. Why don't we do a community campaign? And then it grows in a totally different way than you ever expected. I mean, and even there, I'm being a bit linear because it could be something even more, you know, extreme. Sometimes it's just admitting, like how you were talking about before. It's like just admitting what's going on in your heart, admitting who you are, the shifts that makes in your life around you and in other people around you and stuff, that can just totally change the whole sense of reality around. And I think people a lot of times just they're not tuned into how big of a shift that they can make and how much their voice and their perspective matter, you know?
You know, it's interesting because once upon a time I did, I don't know if you're familiar with Landmark Education.
Mm-hmm.
So I did a couple of their, like, I don't know, the forum and then a couple of things, but they have you track your impact. And they do it through like inviting and then seeing like who other people invite. And I don't know how it exactly went, but I just remember like from that moment on, just being aware of like the trickle down effect and how you, and I know early on when like we were living here on the farm and I didn't feel much, like I didn't know who my community was. And I felt this, like it was right after the first Fridays for Future march in my area. And I had participated and got connected with a woman who was in town from California. And she was like, you know, she was an activist, and she and I connected. And then I just felt the weight of what was happening on our planet. And I'm like, I have to do something. Like, I know we have this farm, but like, I need to do more. And around that time, I got invited to be a green team leader, but like, I really wanted to be out there with the kids marching. And like, but I was like, I have a job, I'm a parent, like I'm gonna lose my job if I just like up and leave. So So I started doing some things, but then I also just put out an email to these people that I knew that I thought might be interested in like just coming for a potluck. And we just did a good old Midwestern like potluck dinner. And we just talked about, and I was just like, here's what I care about. Like, here's what's been going on for me for a long time. And it's led to this point now. Like, I just wanted to call you guys together because I feel like there's a whole lot more we could be doing in our area. And here's some ideas. And I'm just like, this is an invitation for us to all just like if we're all caring about this, what can we do?
Yeah.
What can each of us individually do, and what can we do collectively? And then COVID happened. But for some of the women in the group, like the things they've done since then are just amazing. And I don't know if it's like one woman shared with me, she became a climate reality leader, like in part because of the conversations we had and her looking at herself and what more can she do. Another woman, I think she was already in the works with this, but she started a group called Progressive Persist, and it's Progressive Women of Washington County. And it's this whole like, I mean, there are like 500 some strong women participating in this, and they're like shifting, just like shifting policies and practices and giving women a place to like connect with other like-minded women to say like, hey, these things matter to us.
Yeah.
And again, I don't know if that was a result of that meeting and just sharing what was important to me and requesting that we all just like, hey, can we do more? But I think it was part of it. And
It all adds up. I mean, even though I was saying it's not so linear, like 1 + 1, but it all contributes. That's why it's like taking the crisis and going, okay, what are the opportunities here? Where can I speak out? Where can I just start something?
Yeah. And I think what I'm hearing too, and what you're saying is like the tipping point, like
Mm-hmm.
unmoved.
Good.
The tipping point when like, yeah, you don't know when it's going to happen. You don't know when, like that magic moment will be when enough people will impact change in just the right ways, or will like pull the pressure off just enough that like the earth can take a big deep breath and like like refine some new kind of balance. And but again, it's not for us to know the timeline or the endpoint. We just have to like be willing to let ourselves be part of the process, part of the getting there.
Totally. And it makes me think of our previous conversation and, the things we've talked about in between, and what we're talking about today as well. It's like a lot of people contact me and they're like, well, where can I plug in? Like basically they're looking for some sort of role that's already formed for them, and that they just like sign up, and that it matches perfectly with all their skills, and as if, this job is going to be there for them. Like they can give their CV and then, get a match. And it's like, that's not how this works at all. It's like you just start somewhere, because and I'm writing an article about this now, so when it's done, maybe I'll link it to our conversation. But activism is emergent. It emerges as a response to something, and it's not a predictable thing. It's not like, I don't know, becoming a lawyer and that this is how the system works and this is what's going to be needed, and we can craft a role around that. Like activism is really like, you got to figure it out as you go, and things become created, like opportunities emerge because of what you start. You get more complex opportunities because you started something simple, and then some complexity grows out of that, or because new crises come, like in your case. I mean, my God, nobody wrote an activism job title and description that said, okay, occupational therapist sought who can handle a cancer diagnosis in the family, and green team leader. And, it's been like building, as you've just said, okay, I will show up, I will prepare myself, and I'll be ready for whatever the opportunities, and the crises that generate the opportunities, I'll be ready for responding.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think activism for me is like, it's really just acting on the things that matter to us most.
Yeah.
And so we're all, you know, if we, you know, I think if we look at it like, I am an activist already, am I acting on the things that really matter to me? Because we're all active creatures.
Yeah.
And we're doing all kinds of activity all the time.
Yeah.
And interestingly, like back to my professional title of occupational therapist, I got the name occupationals because we are creatures who occupy our time doing things. Yeah. And so there's many ways that we occupy our time during the course of a given day. And an occupational therapist will look at, like, are you doing the things that give you meaning and purpose?
Yeah.
Give your life meaning and purpose. So it starts with something as simple as, can you brush your own teeth? Sounds like a simple thing, sounds like a, you know, just whatever, but let me tell you, if you can't brush your teeth, like, you're going to have feelings about that.
Yeah.
Because that is like a thing that it's just like, we feel so good after we've brushed our teeth. If we've broken an arm or lost a limb and we can no longer do that simple task, like, that's huge, you know. But then for someone else who's like mental health crisis, planetary crisis equal mental health crisis, like, occupation is going to look really different.
Yeah.
But it's through occupation, like through how we occupy our time, that you know, helps to restore our mental well-being.
Exactly. Yeah, and it makes me think of, like, we can occupy our time with like avoidance mechanisms, or we can occupy our time with, like you said, leaning in to the crisis and going, okay, yeah, I'm leaning in, and my actions and the way I occupy my time and my own, you know, self, the way I embody my own self is leaned into and plugged into, you know, the reality of what's going on around. It's painful, but I'll say it this way, if you do it right, there's no one right way to be an activist, but sustainable activism is closer to a healthy way than the other way. And if you do it right, then you know, you will be able to lean in, and you will have the support to be able to lean in. You know, have that community around you that is able to. And don't seek the community in people that don't, you know, I'm saying this to listeners, don't seek community in people that are you know, in strong states of denial and are like what's the word, are opposed to your activism. Obviously don't, because then you're going to get super discouraged. Go find people, go to a course with Kelly, you know, go find another climate coach, go engage in a climate group, the Good Grief Network, the work that reconnects. I mean, there's so many opportunities out there to find climate community to engage in.
Yeah. Yeah, and we live in a time right now where I think some people wait for the right moment, wait for all the stars to align to make the big change. And I mean, when we moved across country to buy a farm, like, it wasn't convenient. It wasn't like, this is the easy thing to do. It wasn't the natural thing to do as an extension of like what we were already doing. It was just like, this is going to require a lot of effort, a lot of micro steps along the way. I mean, we moved to 5 different locations and like temporarily squatted in different places for like 2 weeks at a time. And we just kept picking up our stuff, and until we found like a 1-year temporary location. And then we, you know, finally landed on the farm. Yeah. But something in me at the time was just like, we have to do this now. Like, we can't wait. Yeah. We have to do it because our girls are at that right age where having a farm seemed like a fun thing for them. We have to do it right now because, like, it just, there was a timing to it that I'm like, and I cried and kicked and screamed when we left Washington, but I was like, I don't know why, but we have to do this now, and it has to be in Wisconsin. Like, it was just like, And now 5 years later, and I always kind of had this like 5-year timeline, like, let's go do this for 5 years and then reevaluate. We can
Interesting.
do anything for 5 years at a time. Let's do this for 5 years. And every time, like, you know, should we stop this? Should we move? Like, those conversations have come up at various points. Our girls have suffered from some isolation, being out in the middle of nowhere. And I'm like, 5 years, like, you know, and so this, like, 5 years is the summer. 5 years is right now.
Wow.
And I was like, holy shit. Like, I didn't expect this is what would be on the end of the 5-year mark. And I don't know what's next. And I'm like, mentally, you know, you can't help yourself but go to like thinking of all different kinds of possible scenarios. But I'm like, okay, this is where we are right now. And this is what we're dealing with. And but I'm so glad that we made the move when we did. Like, I'm so grateful that whatever it was that was nudging me then, like, that I leaned into it, and as inconvenient as it was, like, that we took the steps to get to where we are now, because something would have felt incomplete had we not done it.
Right. Yeah.
You know, it was like calling us, and had we not done it, I would have felt like we, you know, those things that you go like, okay, I can do that later. And it keeps calling you and it keeps calling you, and it will eventually pass on by. But I think it's our like divine responsibility to like respond to what's calling, because it's calling us forward. And it's like the most, I don't know, like, I feel like it's the best and most evolved parts of ourselves that are calling us into ourselves. And we can go there, or we cannot go there, you know, that's our choice. But in times like now, in times like crisis, like, go there, because that's where the adventure is. It's where life moves. It's where connections, meaningful connections with people happen. And it's not easy. No way. But I mean, yeah, the rewards are easier than like trying to do the things that you're just like, you're done doing. Yeah. For me, that sucks. I agree. I mean, and most of the activists that I talk with now, I mean, they all say it's so hard. It's been so hard, and it is so hard, but I wouldn't change a thing. I'm happier now than I've ever been. I agree. Yeah. Well, for everybody that's, you know, with us today, I hope that they're encouraged to, you know, not keep waiting. And if they're, you know, if they've been in a state of waiting, that now is the time. If you're listening to this, obviously you're being called somehow or another. Otherwise, you would have turned this off a long time ago. So I think, you know, I'd like to invite people to follow you if they're not already following you, because I think that they will continue to get these gems, you know, and following your story and just seeing your strength and seeing your perspectives, and, you know, hearing about the way that you're turning your crisis, you know, current crisis into an opportunity, both for yourself personally and for your family, but also for your work in climate advocacy, and, you know, for the earth, and your love for the earth, your care for the earth. I would, you know, love to chat longer, but I know we need to go now. So how can people follow you? You can tell everybody. So yeah, I'm on YouTube, and it's Kelly Isabelle DeMarco. And if you come on there and you like what I'm doing, the liking and subscribing really does have a powerful effect, because it's like, oh, people are liking it and subscribing it, I guess I'll do more. Yeah. Chiming in and giving comments and feedback, or things that you'd like me to cover. Like, one person wanted to know more of the backstory, so I did a whole post on the backstory, and they're very raw and in the moment. But it's really a fun way to engage. I have been invited to give a women's TEDx talk. So I'm working on that right now. It'll be on climate and health and activism. So that's great. Yeah. Yeah, and I follow you, of course, on Facebook, and
LinkedIn as well, so anybody can find you on social media, on the other social media. And are you doing any courses coming up? Is that on your?
So I have one. I was going to be doing one this fall. I'm kind of reframing, like just rethinking how to do it in light of,
Yeah,
being with my husband through what he's going through, but I am going to be doing something for sure. And yeah, so I'll be, if anyone's interested, please direct message me through any of the channels that you find me on. Or you can go to my website, it's kellygreencoaching.com. I'll post updates there. If you see something that doesn't look like it's been updated, been otherwise occupied, but just direct message me or email me, and I'll keep you posted as to what's coming up soon.
Okay, good. Yeah, and I'll have in the show notes, like in the description, I'll have all the links to your website and to your YouTube channel and stuff as well. So
okay, very good.
Well, thank you so much again. Another nourishing conversation, and I know that lots of people who listen are going to be blessed by everything that they've heard from you, and also just from your energy.
Thank you. Thanks for the chance to be here, and just to everyone who's listening, thanks for tuning in today. Thanks for listening to my story and our story, and for whatever work you've already been doing, thank you for that, because I think for me, I feel so moved and inspired by what other people are doing that it just kind of helps me stay in my own lane and stay the course, and find the reserves to keep going when sometimes you just feel like you want to stop. So thank you.
Yeah, I can say the same to listeners as well. Yeah. Okay. Well, until next time, thank you, Kelly. And speaking of subscribing and liking, you can all do the same for the I Heart Earth channel as well, if you feel so called. And we will be back in September for another conversation, like I said, with Lotte van Lith from the Netherlands on positive disintegration and climate change. So that should be a very interesting discussion. So thank you, Kelly. Bye, everybody.
Bye. Thank you.